you cannot evade your accountability and responsibility by merely saying that we have created the platform and rest is none of your concern. The use, abuse, misuse of your platform, particularly which leads to killing of innocent people, is plainly not acceptable.
The rumour mill on WhatsApp has led to a series of murders across India. The accusations range from child kidnappings to people eating beef, which is a sin for Hindus. Once these fake claims go viral, they have at times led to mob violence. At least 30 people have recently been killed. And India's highest court has now asked the federal government to enact new laws to address the threat posed by social media posts. Meanwhile, some officials are asking if WhatsApp and its parent company Facebook will intervene. Well, to discuss this, we're joined by journalist Govindraj Ethiraj, who's the founder of Boom Live, an organization that points out fake news online. Good to have you on the program, Govindraj. Let me ask you, I mean, you're going to try and debunk fake news. How do you actually stop people from, I guess, acting upon their impulses? Because it's very difficult for you to convince someone otherwise after they've made up their mind, right?
Right. So, I mean, what we do is really aimed at what I would call the institutional end of the consuming audience, which is people who already know, who understand, who are in positions of power, politicians, leaders, and so on. So when they, you know, for instance, forward something which is evidently false, or if they share information or they retweet stuff, and then we point it out, we obviously have an impact. So that's where it works. It also works maybe with people who are general audiences but a little more educated. Where it does not work is clearly these kind of areas. The other thing is you have to remember that many of these what they call WhatsApp killings are typically triggered by rumors which spread in very, very hyper-local environments. It could be between, it could begin in a village and then spread to another village in one remote corner of the country. And there's no way anyone, even in law enforcement, leave alone a small independent fact-checking agency like ours sitting in a city like Bombay, where I am right now, that can do anything about it. So these are really situations where law enforcement organizations or law enforcement authorities have to act and ideally preemptively, where people are told that do not believe rumors that are spread and reach you through platforms, social media platforms. And number two, more importantly, do not take the law into your own hands. If you see someone who is behaving suspiciously, then hand them over to the police or wait till the police arrive, particularly if it's far away from, far away from a city or a town. So that's really the problem. And it's clearly a law enforcement challenge, which in some states of India, the law enforcement authorities are beginning to act on and beginning to try and engage with local communities and so on. But the nature of this problem is a very large one.
Can you give me an example of an urban legend or myth or rumor that you guys have recently debunked?
So we debunk stuff all the time. I mean, we do it every day. I mean, some of the work we do is to do with what I would broadly call the communal, social, and political space. But we're also doing stuff around health, medicine, and areas like finance, where, for instance, there have been rumors about runs on banks which are owned by the government, and that's been going on for some time. So we've been debunking there. On the communal social side, we've been debunking content which has been particularly aimed at dividing communities, and there are several examples. There's something we did a few months ago, which was, there was a photograph shown of a religious leader from one community, and someone posted on a website saying that, this religious leader has been beaten up by members of another community, and it turned out that that person had actually been in a car accident, and that's how the religious leader, the local religious leader or a spiritual leader, received those injuries, and we debunked that. So there are many examples like that. We keep, like I said, encountering them on a day-to-day basis. In the area of health and medicine, there are many. I mean, these obviously are not the same as people dying or getting killed, but the outcomes can be quite dangerous because people tend to believe them. And there was one which involved a medicine, the specific rumor doing the rounds was that if you have this medicine, which was really like a paracetamol combination, you can die. And sales of that medicine, we were told, crashed, and the company was in a panic. and we found out that all that had happened, actually there was something wrong with that medicine or that batch of medicine, as we found out from the company, but all that happened was that the efficacy of that medicine or that batch of medicines was weak, and therefore it did not work. So if you had a headache and you took that medicine from that particular batch, it didn't work. Surely no one died. But that was the rumor doing the round and spreading rapidly on social media platforms.
Yeah.
So there are many, and like I said, in each category we find stuff, but obviously what worries us most is the kind which leads to deaths and mob vigilantism, but that's something that we can do very little about.
Right. So I'm going to ask you for a second to step out of your domain of expertise as a fact checker and a debunker and ask you about legislating against this, and whether you think it will be easy to do so, because we have India's highest court asking Parliament, sort this out, come up with something we can approve, come up with a law for us to implement in order to stop these vigilante killings, these mob killings that are usually spread through social media, especially things like WhatsApp, right? How do you actually legislate against that? Because do you punish the person who committed the act? Do you punish the person at ground zero or person zero who first spread the rumor? Is this going to be easy to do?
Right, and that's a great question that we are all grappling with. I think there are two or three segments to this question, and there are two or three kinds of answers to this. So first is that the social media platforms do bear some responsibility. So they have to work to make sure that their platforms become more transparent. So it's evident to people that there are messages that have been created elsewhere and are being forwarded, and I as a recipient should not necessarily believe it knowing that it's been forwarded. That's one. Now, of course, there is a very good chance that I would believe it also because it's been forwarded. The second part is clearly, like I said, a law enforcement challenge. People cannot, in any country, under any condition, take the law into their own hands. If I suspect someone of being a child lifter or of transporting something like beef, which is an issue in some states in India, I should hand that person over to the local police authorities. So I have to respect the rule of law, and there is no substitute for that, and there is no legislation that can go beyond what there is already. So that's the second part. The third is really awareness and education, which it all boils down to. People, the internet in India, the mobile phone or the smartphone equals the internet equals WhatsApp. And there are hundreds of millions of people who are getting hold or accessing of a smartphone and accessing the internet for the first time in their lives. And all of that has happened in recent years. So for them, what they see on a platform, on a social media platform, is almost like God's truth. So they have to be educated and made aware of the fact that you cannot trust something that you see like this. And it's really, I mean, this can work even for you and me. I mean, we have a pain on the side or in the back, and we Google and say, okay, if I have a pain in my back, what could it be? And typically, I go to a site like WebMD or Livestrong, and I find an answer which says, okay, it could be one of these 4 or 5 reasons, and there's a very good chance that you and I will believe it, because say, okay, it may not be bone cancer, but it surely could be this. Something more minor.
I always look at the worst case scenario. I always look at the worst case scenario, and then I freak myself out, right?
Exactly.
So after 5 minutes of Googling,
if you and I are going to believe
I'm
this,
on my
can you
deathbed,
imagine what someone who is typically illiterate, who's not exposed to the internet or social media tends to react, or the way they could react?
Yeah. One of the things I want to do is get into WhatsApp and Facebook and whether they bear some responsibility, because in the West, a lot of the discussions are, and I want to ask you to answer this very briefly, if you don't mind. A lot of the discussions there are, this is end-to-end encryption. We want to keep the government out of spying into my private messages and my dirty pictures or whatever the hell it is, right? But on the other hand, we're having, in places like India, people are saying, well, there's a responsibility that the tech companies have as well in order not to facilitate something where this fake news is being spread. Do they have a responsibility to do something about it? Very briefly, please, sir.
Right. So like I said earlier, I think they have a clear responsibility to become more transparent. Have they become the most transparent at this point? I don't know. But this is a shifting goal. And we have to all understand that, a few years ago, all the technology companies were responding with extreme arrogance. I think today they've understood that this is a problem that they need to work very closely with government, societies, communities, people, and understand that you cannot step back and say that, I've created the platform and then what happens on it is not my responsibility. responsibility. I think they've acknowledged that and they're beginning to work more closely. And I think there's a lot more work that needs to be done. But what needs to be done and what's the best response to each situation, whether it's country specific or community specific, is something that will evolve and will evolve as people like us and all of us put pressure on the technology companies, on law enforcement to become more proactive to situations like this. So it's a highly evolving situation and everyone has to change and evolve, and particularly the technology companies. But to pin the entire blame on them, I don't think is the right thing to do.
Govindraj Ethiraj, it's been great talking to you. Thank you very much for joining us here on the Newsmakers.